to the room of requirement. Today I'm going to be answering the age-old question, do all spiritual paths lead to the same goal? So I had a subscriber request this topic. I'm going to be going over about 50 different paths. I'm going to be talking about their goals, what the practitioners experience, and some challenges and pitfalls of each path. And then I'm going to be directly answering the question from the subscriber. So let's just go ahead and dive in. The assumption of unity. One of the most common ideas repeated in modern spirituality is that all paths ultimately lead to the same destination. It is often presented as a kind of higher understanding, a way of dissolving division between traditions. At a surface level, this idea appears unifying and even compassionate. However, when examined more carefully, it begins to create confusion rather than clarity. It collapses important distinctions that were preserved very intentionally within traditional systems. The issue is not that different paths never share similar experiences. At advanced stages, practitioners across traditions often report stages of unity, dissolution of ordinary identity, and a shift in perception that transcends conventional duality. These similarities are real, but similarity of experience does not mean identity of goal. Two systems can pass through similar states while ultimately interpreting and stabilizing those states in completely different ways. When people say all paths lead to the same place, they are often referring to a shared experiential threshold, not a shared metaphysical conclusion. The difference between those two is critical. One describes what may be encountered along the way, and the other defines what the path is actually aiming towards as its final orientation. Why goals matter. The end determines the path. Every spiritual system is structured around an endpoint, whether explicitly stated or implicitly assumed. That endpoint determines everything else within the system: the practices, the ethics, the disciplines, the worldview, and the interpretation of experience. If you misunderstand the goal of a path, you will misunderstand the function of its practices. For example, a system that aims at union with a divine source will interpret mystical experience differently than a system that aims at the cessation of the self. A system that seeks to refine individuality will treat identity as something to be cultivated, while a system that seeks liberation from identity will treat it as something to be seen through. Without clarity on the goal, practitioners often begin mixing frameworks in ways that create internal contradiction. They may attempt to dissolve the self while simultaneously trying to refine it, or pursue surrender while also attempting to assert individual will. These contradictions are not signs of depth, they are signs of conceptual confusion. Understanding the goal of a path brings coherence to the practice. It allows you to interpret your experiences correctly and prevents unnecessary fragmentation. Core distinction, categories of spiritual aims. Most spiritual paths can be understood as orienting towards one or more of the following categories: union, merging or participating in a divine reality; liberation, freedom from suffering or cyclical existence; realization, recognition of ultimate truth or non-duality; transformation, refinement and elevation of the individual; deification, expansion or perfection of individual being. These categories overlap at times, but they are not interchangeable. Each carries different assumptions about what the self is, what reality is, and what should ultimately happen to the practitioner. Okay, so this was the subscriber request. So here they're referring to a video that I did on different spiritual paths. If you haven't seen that, you can go back and check it. So I'm just going to read. But what they're referring to in the beginning of these, the first introductory sentences is that video. So what an incredible video this is. Thank you for your effort. I appreciate the advice in regards to chaos magic. I'm attracted to all sorts of paths, systems, Zen, Vajrayana, Bardens, Golden Dawn, and Delima. But like you said, this isn't entertainment. This is the great work. One should treat this seriously. Would you consider doing a video about the different goals of spiritual paths? I've seen people say that they all lead to the same destination, but is that the case? For example, is Christian theosis the same as Buddhist nirvana? Can one maintain their individuality after the supposed ego death? Would one even want to? Is the goal Kether, Ein, Ein Sof, R? Is the left-hand path's goal an immature interpretation of what is possible? I've seen Vajrayana Buddhists claim that monotheistic religions don't actually lead to enlightenment, but instead to a Pure Land bardo for a certain period of time before reincarnation ensues, although he may have been talking about exoteric religions. In any case, I'm looking forward to what comes next. So that is why I am doing this video. And what I will say about the last part of the question about monotheistic religions don't actually lead to enlightenment, but instead they go to a Pure Land or bardo for a certain period of time. Yes, I absolutely believe that this is true to a certain extent without going too far into this, but I do believe in traditional religions or exoteric religions that when they do die, they temporarily go into the state of what their belief system is. And I know this from personal experience of being a past life regressionist, with some other stuff that I've done too as well. So I do agree with this. Okay, so let's move on. So, number one, we have Christian mysticism, also known as theosis. So the goal of theosis is participation in divine nature while maintaining a distinction between the individual and God. The practitioner does not become the totality of God, but becomes permeated by divine presence. This is often described as transformation into likeness with God, alignment in will, perception, and being. The emphasis is relational. So there is still devotion, still reverence, still a sense of I and thou, but the separation becomes increasingly transparent. So practitioners engage in contemplative prayer, sacramental life, fasting, confession, and moral purification. And the path is not merely mystical but ethical. One's behavior, speech, and inner disposition are continuously refined. The inner life is disciplined through repetition of prayer and attention to divine presence. Internally, practitioners encounter dryness, doubt, and long periods where God feels absent. So this is not failure, but a part of purification. Emotional dependence on consolation is gradually removed, so the practitioner learns to remain steady without constant reinforcement. And a major challenge is mistaking emotional intensity for spiritual depth. So another is spiritual pride, believing oneself to be progressing due to perceived closeness to the divine. So the path repeatedly returns the practitioner to humility. So I'm going to go over all of these paths and tell you what the practitioners do, what happens to them, and then some challenges. And when we get done with this, then I'll have to talk about this a little bit more. But I thought, this needed to be in depth so that you can understand that basically not all paths lead to the same goal or destination necessarily, because they need to be categorized and they're structured differently. And I'm explaining why with all of these different paths. Okay. 2, Eastern Orthodox hesychasm. I put that in there because I wanted to pronounce this correctly, and I'm probably still butchering it. Anyhow, so the goal of hesychasm is inner stillness, leading to a direct experience of divine presence. So it is highly focused expression of theosis that emphasizes the descent of awareness into the heart. So the practitioner seeks not conceptual understanding, but direct encounter. The core practice is the Jesus prayer, repeated continuously in coordination with breath and attention. And over time, the prayer becomes automatic, moving from verbal repetition to internalized awareness. The body, breath, and mind are gradually unified. Practitioners often encounter intense distraction, physical tension, and emotional resistance as they attempt to stabilize attention. The simplicity of the practice reveals the instability of the mind. So a common pitfall is forcing the practice or attempting to produce mystical experiences prematurely. Without guidance, practitioners may confuse imagination with genuine spiritual perception. And the tradition strongly emphasizes discipline under proper structure to avoid self-deception. Theravada Buddhism, or Nirvana. The goal of nirvana is the cessation of suffering through the complete extinguishing of craving, attachment, and ignorance. The self is not perfected or elevated, but understood as a process rather than a fixed entity. Liberation comes through seeing clearly the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and non-self nature of all phenomena. Practitioners engage in ethical discipline, mindfulness of body and mind, and insight meditation. Vipassana was they observe sensations, thoughts, and emotions without attachment, gradually weakening identification with them. Internally, practitioners encounter restlessness, aversion, and subtle forms of attachment to meditative states. As insight deepens, previously unnoticed patterns of clinging become visible. A major challenge is mistaking intellectual understanding for direct insight. Another is attachment to calm or pleasant states, which can stall deeper realization. The path requires sustained observation beyond comfort. And I've run into that myself before with meditation. Okay, Mahayana Buddhism, Bodhisattva ideal. The goal of Mahayana is awakening combined with universal compassion. The practitioner seeks liberation not only for themselves but for all beings. Emptiness, sunyata, becomes central, the understanding that all phenomena lack inherent independent existence. Practices include meditation, ethical conduct, and the cultivation of compassion through intentional reflection and action. The Bodhisattva vow commits the practitioner to remain engaged with the world rather than withdrawing from it. Internally, practitioners encounter the paradox of acting compassionately while recognizing the emptiness of all phenomena. This requires balancing wisdom and compassion without falling into nihilism or sentimentality. A common pitfall is intellectualizing emptiness, leading to detachment rather than genuine compassion. Another is burnout from attempting to help others without sufficient internal stability. Yes, don't do that. Vajrayana, or Tantric Buddhism. So the goal of Vajrayana is rapid awakening through transformation of perception. Rather than gradually renouncing identity, the practitioner uses symbolic and energetic methods to recognize the already enlightened nature of the mind. Practices include deity visualization, mantra repetition, ritual, and subtle body work. The practitioner identifies with enlightened forms to shift perception directly. So internally, practitioners encounter powerful imagery, emotional intensity, and shifts in identity. The practice can feel vivid and transformative, but also destabilizing if not grounded. So a major challenge is mistaking visualization for fantasy or becoming attached to symbolic experiences. Without discipline, practitioners may inflate their sense of progress, and the path requires strong structure and guidance to remain stable. Okay, hope I don't butcher this one. Advaita Vedanta, a non-dual realization. Okay, so this is one of the major Hindu spiritual paths. So the goal is realization that the individual self is not separate from ultimate reality. There is no union because there was never separation. So the sense of individuality is seen as provisional rather than ultimate. Practitioners engage in self-inquiry, asking who am I, while examining the nature of experience. They distinguish between what is transient and what is unchanging. Internally, practitioners encounter subtle resistance as identification with thoughts and identity structures. They loosen, so there may be periods of disorientation as familiar reference points dissolve. A major pitfall is prematurely claiming realization intellectually. Another is bypassing unresolved psychological material under the assumption that there is no self-fix, and the path requires both clarity and honesty. Classical yoga, or Raja Yoga. The goal is the cessation of mental fluctuation and the stabilization of pure awareness. The practitioner seeks to disentangle consciousness from the movements of the mind. So the Eightfold Path provides a structured progression. ethical discipline, posture, breath control, sensory withdrawal, concentration, meditation, and absorption. Practitioners encounter physical discomfort, mental distraction, and resistance to sustained discipline. So the structure reveals the degree of instability in attention. A common challenge is focusing too heavily on physical aspects while neglecting mental discipline. And another is becoming attached to altered states rather than developing stable awareness. Kashmir Shaivism. So the goal is recognition of oneself as universal consciousness while remaining engaged with the world. Unlike systems that treat the world as illusion, this path affirms it is an expression of consciousness. Practices include meditation, mantra, and direct recognition techniques that shift perception from limitation to expansiveness. Internally, practitioners encounter shifts in perception where ordinary experience begins to feel less separate. The challenge is stabilizing this recognition rather than experiencing it temporarily. A major pitfall is intellectualizing non-duality without embodying it. So another is losing ground while attempting to maintain expanded awareness. Hermeticism. The goal is gnosis, direct knowledge of the divine reality and alignment with it. So the practitioner seeks to understand and embody the principles governing existence. Practices include study of symbolic systems, meditation, and alignment with cosmic laws. The principle as above, so below guides the work. Practitioners encounter intellectual expansion alongside the challenge of integrating knowledge into lived experience. Insight without embodiment becomes imbalance. The common pitfall here is remaining at the level of theory. Another is over-identification with knowledge rather than transformation. Kabbalah. The goal is reintegration with divine source through alignment of the self with the structure of the tree of life. The practitioner moves through levels of consciousness toward unity. Practices include meditation, study, ethical refinement, and symbolic work with the Sephiroth. Internally, practitioners encounter shifts in perception and increasing awareness of imbalance within themselves. So a major challenge is misunderstanding symbolic structures as literal rather than experiential, and another is attempting advanced work without foundational preparation. Thelema, or the thelemic path, true will. The goal is discovery and execution of true will, the unique trajectory of the individual, aligned with deeper purpose. The self is not dissolved but clarified. Practices include ritual, meditation, and sustained self-observation. The practitioner removes distortion to uncover genuine direction. So internally, practitioners encounter confusion between desire and will. Distinguishing between the two requires discipline and honesty. A major pitfall is mistaking impulse desire for true will, and another is using the concept to justify undisciplined behavior. Chaos magic. The goal is flexible, often focused on results rather than fixed metaphysical truth. Belief is treated as a tool rather than a commitment. Practices include sigil work, altered states, and experimental use of different systems. Practitioners encounter rapid shifts in perspective and experience, and this can be empowering but also very destabilizing. A major challenge is lack of long-term structure, and without discipline, the practitioner may become scattered rather than developed. So this is still only a portion of the landscape. In the next section, we will expand further into additional traditions, including alchemical, Sufi, Taoist, and left-hand path systems, and continue examining how their goals differ and converge. Ceremonial magic, high magic, and theurgical traditions. The goal of ceremonial magic, particularly in its higher and theurgical forms, is the alignment of the individual with higher intelligences and ultimately with divine reality. In systems such as the Golden Dawn, Solomonic traditions, and later developments, this is often framed as knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, also known as the HGA, which is, spoiler alert, your higher self, followed by further ascent or integration. The practitioner does not seek more external results, but transformation through structure, interaction with symbolic, archetypal, and intelligible forces. Practitioners engage in ritual, highly structured, repeatable operations involving divine names, geometric forms, elemental correspondences, planetary forces, and symbolic gestures. These rituals train attention, discipline, imagination, and align the psyche with ordered structures. The work is cumulative and requires consistency over long periods of time. Internally, practitioners encounter instability in attention, emotional fluctuation, and projection. Ritual reveals the degree to which the mind scatters or is undisciplined. It also amplifies internal content, which is unintegrated. What is unintegrated becomes more visible. Yes, it does. So a major challenge is mistaking ritual performance for transformation. Another is inflation. So believing oneself to be more advanced due to symbolic engagement with higher forces. And without grounding and discipline, practitioners may become imbalanced or overly identified with their experiences. So this is, my path. And early on, I had those issues, the challenges at first. I absolutely did, and I will admit it. So that will happen at first, and then eventually the more you do it, the longer you do it, that stuff starts to go away. Okay, alchemy, spiritual or internal alchemy. So the goal of alchemy, particularly in its spiritual form, is transformation of the practitioner through stages often described symbolically as nigredo, albedo, and rubedo. These stages represent dissolution, purification, and integration. The aim is not merely knowledge, but transmutation of being. So practices vary, but often include contemplation, symbolic work, and internal observation. Alchemical texts use layered symbolism to describe psychological and spiritual processes. The practitioner must learn to interpret these symbols experientially. Internally, practitioners encounter cycles of breakdown and reorganization. Periods of confusion or disorientation may occur as old structures dissolve. A major pitfall is literalizing alchemical language or remaining at the level of symbolism without undergoing transformation. Another is becoming attached to the idea of transformation without engaging in the difficult internal work it requires. Rosicrucianism. The goal of Rosicrucian systems and spiritual illumination combined with ethical refinement and service. The practitioner seeks to become an agent of harmony and knowledge within the world. Practices include study, contemplation, and symbolic ritual. The emphasis is often on gradual development and integration rather than rapid transformation. Internally, practitioners encounter the challenge of balancing knowledge with humility. Intellectual understanding must be matched by ethical embodiment. A common pitfall is remaining within theoretical study without translating insight into lived behavior. Another is over-identification with esoteric identity. Sufism, Islamic mysticism. The goal of Sufism is union with the divine through love, remembrance, and annihilation of the ego, or fana. Followed by subsistence and God, Vaka. The practitioner seeks to dissolve separation while remaining in devotion. Practices include hikir, or remembrance, poetry, music, and disciplined ethical life. The path emphasizes love as a transformative force. Internally, practitioners encounter longing, emotional intensity, and surrender. The process can be deeply moving, but also destabilizing if not grounded. A major challenge is confusing emotional intensity with genuine transformation, and another is losing structure in favor of feeling, which can lead to imbalance. Taoism. The goal of Taoism is alignment with the Tao, the underlying natural order of reality. Rather than striving or forcing transformation, the practitioner seeks harmony and effortless action, or a Wu Wei. Practices include breath work, internal energy cultivation, meditation, and observation of natural cycles. The path emphasizes balance rather than intensity, and internally, practitioners encounter resistance to simplicity. The mind often seeks complexity, while Taoism requires refinement of perception and reduction of excess effort. A pitfall is misunderstanding non-action as passivity. Another is failing to cultivate discipline under the assumption that alignment should be effortless. Neoplatonism. The goal of Neoplatonism is ascent of the soul toward the One, the ultimate source of all existence. The practitioner seeks to move beyond multiplicity toward unity. Practices include philosophical contemplation, ethical purification, and intellectual refinement. The ascent is both conceptual and experiential. Internally, practitioners encounter the challenge of moving beyond abstract understanding into direct realization. A major pitfall is remaining at the level of philosophy without transformation. Another is intellectual elitism, where knowledge replaces practice. Gnosticism. The goal of Gnostic traditions is liberation through knowledge or gnosis of one's true origin beyond the material world. The practitioner seeks to awaken from illusion and return to divine source. Practices include symbolic interpretation, contemplation, and inward reflection. The emphasis is on insight rather than external ritual alone. Internally, practitioners encounter alienation from conventional structures and a sense of separation from the material world. A challenge is becoming overly dualistic, rejecting the world rather than understanding its function. Another is confusion due to fragmentation of historical sources. Zen Buddhism. The goal of Zen is direct realization of one's true nature beyond the conceptual thought. The emphasis is on immediate experience rather than gradual accumulation of knowledge. Practices include seated meditation, zazen, koan study, and disciplined attention to ordinary activity. Internally, practitioners encounter frustration as the mind attempts to grasp what cannot be conceptualized. A major pitfall is intellectualizing insight or mistaking brief experiences for stable realization. Another is rejecting structure in favor of spontaneity prematurely. Shamanic traditions. The goal of many shamanic systems is interaction with spiritual realities for healing, knowledge, and guidance. The practitioner acts as an intermediary between worlds. Practices include trance states, journeying, ritual, and interaction with symbolic or spirit forms. Internally, practitioners encounter vivid imagery and altered states of consciousness. These experiences can be powerful but require grounding. A major challenge is distinguishing symbolic experience from literal interpretation, and another is instability if practices are pursued without structure. Left-hand path traditions. The goal of many left-hand path systems is the preservation and expansion of individual consciousness rather than its dissolution. The practitioner seeks autonomy, power, and self-directed evolution. Practices vary widely, but often include ritual, symbolic work, and intentional confrontation of taboo or limitation. Internally, practitioners encounter strong identification with individuality and the challenge of maintaining balance without external structure. A major pitfall is inflation, confusing autonomy with lack of discipline, and another is isolation from corrective feedback. Modern psychospiritual integration. The goal of modern integrative systems is psychological wholeness combined with spiritual awareness. The practitioner seeks to integrate unconscious material rather than transcend it. Practices include therapy, shadow work, and mindfulness. Internally, practitioners encounter unresolved emotional material and patterns of behavior. A challenge is remaining at the level of processing without moving toward deeper realization. Another is confusing psychological insight with spiritual transformation. And this happens a lot in modern spirituality, by the way. New Age synthesis, modern hybrid systems. The goal varies widely but often includes personal growth, manifestation, and expanded awareness, and these systems combine elements from multiple traditions. Practices include visualization, affirmation, and energy work. Internally, practitioners may experience initial enthusiasm followed by lack of depth or structure. A major challenge is inconsistency due to lack of clear framework. Another is misunderstanding traditional concepts, or lack thereof. Esoteric astrology, cosmic alignment paths. The goal is alignment with cosmic patterns and cycles, and the practitioner seeks to understand their place within a larger structure of meaning. Practices include chart study, observation of transits, and symbolic interpretation. Internally, practitioners encounter insight into patterns but may struggle with application, and a pitfall is over-reliance on external systems rather than developing internal stability. So we are now beginning to see a pattern emerge. Some paths dissolve the self, some refine it, some align it, some transcend it, and some expand it. So in the next section, we will continue expanding the map further and begin addressing the deeper question. Are these differences ultimately reconcilable, or do they represent fundamentally different destinations? Western alchemical psychology, Jungian integration. The goal is individuation, the integration of consciousness and unconscious aspects of the psyche into a unified whole. Unlike classical alchemy, this approach frames transformation psychologically rather than cosmologically, though it retains symbolic depth. Practitioners engage in dream analysis, symbolic interpretation, and confrontation with the unconscious material. The work is inward and often slow, requiring sustained self-observation. Internally, practitioners encounter shadow material, contradiction, and fragmentation within identity. This process can feel destabilizing as previously unconscious elements surface. A major pitfall is becoming absorbed in analysis without transformation. Another is mistaking insight for integration, leading to intellectual understanding without behavioral change. Tantric Buddhism. The goal is liberation through the recognition of divine consciousness within all aspects of existence, including the body and sensory experience. Rather than rejecting the world, the practitioner transforms engagement with it. Practices include mantra, visualization, ritual, and energy cultivation through the subtle body. The path often works directly with desire and embodiment. Internally, practitioners encounter intensified experience, both sensory and emotional, as perception is refined rather than suppressed. A major challenge is misusing the path to justify indulgence rather than transformation. Without discipline, practitioners may confuse activation with realization. Kundalini Yoga. The goal is awakening of latent energy, or Kundalini, and its ascent through the central channel, leading to expanded awareness and realization. Practices include breathwork, posture, concentration, and energy-focused meditation. The system is highly structured around the subtle body. Internally, practitioners may encounter intense physical and psychological experiences as energy begins to move. A major pitfall is attempting to force awakening prematurely. Without preparation, this can lead to imbalance, confusion, and destabilization. I would not recommend this starting out. I would start out with another form of yoga first, and then get stable internally, and then do this. Dzogchen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The goal is direct recognition of the natural state, primordial awareness that is already complete. So there's no gradual path in the conventional sense, and the emphasis is on immediate recognition. Practices include direct introduction by a teacher, followed by stabilization of recognition through non-distraction. Internally, practitioners encounter difficulty maintaining recognition. The mind attempts to conceptualize what must be directly experienced. A major pitfall is mistaking intellectual understanding for realization. Another is failing to stabilize recognition over time. Chan, or Chinese Zen roots. This goal is sudden or gradual awakening to one's true nature, emphasizing direct experience over doctrinal complexity. Practices include meditation, discipline, and teacher-guided inquiry. Internally, practitioners encounter tension between effort and non-effort, often struggling to balance discipline with spontaneity. A pitfall is rejecting structure prematurely or overly relying on conceptual understanding. Taoist internal alchemy, or Naidan. The goal is refinement of internal energy and return to original unity through transformation of essence, energy, and spirit. Practices include breathwork, visualization, and energy circulation within the body. Internally, practitioners encounter subtle changes in perception and bodily awareness. A major challenge is lack of sensitivity to internal processes, leading to ineffective or forced practice. Stoic philosophical discipline. The goal is alignment with reason and acceptance of what is beyond control. While not mystical in a traditional sense, it forms a foundation for internal stability. This is really popular right now too. It's got trendy a few years ago. Practices include reflection, ethical discipline, and reframing of perception. Internally, practitioners encounter emotional resistance when confronting attachment to outcomes, and a pitfall is suppressing emotion rather than understanding it. So that's completely foreign to me. Esoteric Christian gnosis. The goal is a direct experiential knowledge of divine reality beyond institutional structure. The practitioner seeks inner revelation rather than external authority. Practices include contemplation, symbolic interpretation, and inward focus. Internally, practitioners encounter tension between tradition and personal insight. A major challenge is fragmentation due to lack of unified structure. Martinism. The goal is reintegration of the human being into divine unity through inner transformation and moral refinement. Practices include meditation, prayer, and symbolic work within an initiatory structure. Internally, practitioners encounter gradual refinement rather than dramatic change. A pitfall is expecting rapid transformation from a path that emphasizes subtle development. Freemasonry, esoteric aspect. The goal is moral and symbolic refinement through progressive degrees of understanding. Practices include ritual, symbolism, and ethical development. Internally, practitioners encounter insight through allegory rather than direct mystical experience. A challenge is remaining at the surface level of ritual without internalizing its meaning. Druidic traditions, modern revival. The goal is alignment with nature, cycles, and ancestral wisdom. Practices include ritual, seasonal observance, and symbolic engagement with natural forces. Internally, practitioners encounter grounding and connection rather than transcendence. So a pitfall is romanticizing nature without discipline. Wicca, structured practice. The goal varies but often includes harmony with natural forces and personal empowerment. Practices include ritual, seasonal cycles, and symbolic work. Internally, practitioners encounter emotional and symbolic engagement, and the challenge is lack of depth when structure is not maintained. Astrotheurgy. The goal is alignment with planetary and cosmic forces through ritual and timing. Practices include electional timing, planetary invocation, and symbolic alignment. Internally, practitioners encounter cycles of influence and pattern recognition. A pitfall is dependency on external timing without internal development. So, this is astrotheurgy is basically what high magic is. It's part of it. Egyptian theurgical systems reconstructed. So the goal is alignment with divine principles through ritual participation, and practices include invocation, symbolic identification with deities, and disciplined ritual. Internally, practitioners encounter symbolic depth and identity shifts, and a challenge is maintaining authenticity in reconstructed systems. So I put a note in here that this is usually done later in high magic as a modification of traditional rituals. So usually we'll replace angelic or goetic intelligences with deities from ancient Sumeria or ancient Egypt. Shinto, spiritual purity path. The goal is purity and alignment with natural and ancestral forces. Practices include ritual purification, offerings, and reverence. Internally, practitioners encounter simplicity and clarity. A pitfall is underestimating the depth of simple practices. Seek mysticism. The goal is union with the divine through remembrance and ethical living. Practices include chanting, service, and disciplined life. Internally, practitioners encounter devotion balanced with action. And a challenge is maintaining consistency in both. Bon, I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, but it's Tibetan pre-Buddhist systems. The goal is liberation and harmony with spiritual forces. Practices include ritual, meditation, and symbolic work. Internally, practitioners encounter complex symbolic structures. The pitfall is confusion due to overlapping systems. Hermetic Kabbalah, modern Western system. The goal is structured ascent through symbolic frameworks, combining Hermetic and Kabbalistic elements. Practices include pathworking, ritual, and study. Internally, practitioners encounter layered symbolic meaning, and the challenge is becoming overwhelmed by complexity. Occult psychotechnologies, modern experimental systems. The goal varies, often focusing on altered states and exploration of consciousness. Practices include sensory manipulation and experimental techniques. Internally, practitioners encounter unusual states without structure, and a major pitfall is instability. Monastic ascetic paths, cross-traditional. The goal is purification through discipline, simplicity, and withdrawal from excess. Practices include fasting, silence, and routine. Internally, practitioners encounter resistance to restriction, and a challenge is sustaining discipline long term. Hindu Bhakti, the devotional path. The goal is union with love and devotion, through love and devotion. Practices include chanting, ritual, and surrender. Internally, practitioners encounter emotional intensity, and a pitfall is dependency on emotional states. Secular contemplative practice. The goal is clarity, awareness, and psychological stability without metaphysical framing. Practices include mindfulness and observation. Internally, practitioners encounter insight into patterns, and a challenge is lack of deeper orientation. Esoteric numerology systems. The goal is understanding patterns and meaning through numerical structures. Practices include analysis and interpretation. Internally, practitioners encounter pattern recognition, and a pitfall is overinterpretation. Occult symbolic initiation systems. The goal is transformation through symbolic progression. Practices include initiation rituals and structured learning. Internally, practitioners encounter identity shifts, and a challenge is externalizing the process. Synthetic personal paths, self-constructed paths. So the goal varies depending on the individual. Practices are self-selected and often eclectic. Internally, practitioners encounter freedom and confusion, and a major pitfall is lack of coherence. So I usually see this in older folks that I mentor. Final synthesis. Do all spiritual paths lead to the same goal? After examining the landscape, the answer becomes clear. Spiritual paths do not all lead to the same destination. They may pass through similar states, but they do not all stabilize those states in the same way, nor do they interpret them through the same framework. What appears similar at a level of experience diverges at the level of meaning and final orientation. The confusion arises because many advanced states shared characteristics. So practitioners across traditions report loss of ordinary identity, dissolution of boundaries, and a sense of unity or non-separation. From the outside, these experiences appear identical. But what happens after the experience is where the paths diverge. Theosis versus nirvana, as an example. Okay, so union versus cessation. So in theosis, the individual is transformed and brought into union with the divine while maintaining a relational distinction. The practitioner does not become the totality of God, but participates in divine nature. There remains devotion, reverence, and relationship. Identity is not erased. It's sanctified, refined, and aligned with divine will. The path emphasizes participation, transformation, and communion. In nirvana, the goal is fundamentally different. It is not union with the divine being, but cessation of the structures that produce suffering. So the sense of a permanent, independent self is seen through and released. What dissolves is identification, attachment, and the illusion of continuity. What remains is not a perfected identity, but freedom from the need for one. So these are not the same outcome. One preserves relational being, and the other dissolves the basis for it. Does individuality remain? So whether individuality remains depends entirely on the path being followed. Some systems dissolve identification with individuality, revealing it as transient or constructed. Others refine individuality, aligning it with higher principles or divine will. Some preserve and even expand individuality as a central aspect of the path. So the question is not whether individuality remains in an absolute sense, but how each system defines and treats it. Without clarity on this point, practitioners often move between systems that are operating with fundamentally different assumptions, which leads to confusion rather than depth. Kether, Ein, and the Absolute. In Kabbalistic and Hermetic systems, the highest principles, Kether, Ein, Ein Sof, Ar, represent increasingly subtle levels of reality approaching the absolute source. So these are not always understood as destinations in a simple sense, but as levels of realization, alignment, or proximity to the infinite. The practitioner ascends through structured stages, refining perception and consciousness along the way. So this differs from systems that emphasize immediate realization or complete cessation. It is a model of ordered ascent, so where integration occurs progressively rather than instantaneously. The left-hand path question. Some paths emphasize the preservation of expansion of individual consciousness rather than its dissolution. These are often grouped under what is called the left-hand path. The practitioner seeks autonomy, self-mastery, and self-directed evolution, maintaining individuality as central rather than something to be transcended. So whether this is considered immature and complete depends on the framework being used. From the perspective of systems that prioritize dissolution of self, preservation of individuality may appear limited. So from systems that prioritize self-realization and sovereignty, dissolution may appear unnecessary. So the difference is not simply evaluative, it's directional. So each path defines what should be maintained and what should be surrendered. The real answer. Do all paths lead to the same destination? No. However, they may pass through similar experiential thresholds, so many traditions encounter states of unity, dissolution, or expanded awareness. Now, what differs is how those states are interpreted, integrated, and stabilized. So the convergence happens at the level of experience, and the divergence happens at the level of meaning and final orientation. And this distinction is essential for maintaining clarity. A spiritual path is not defined only by its practices or symbols. It is defined by its aim. So union is not the same as cessation, and recognition is not the same as transformation, and refinement is not the same as dissolution. So each system is internally coherent when understood on its own terms. Confusion arises when frameworks are combined with understanding their goals, without understanding their goals. So clarity emerges when the destination is understood. The question is not which path is superior, but which goal you are willing to orient your life towards. So once the destination is understood, the structure of the path becomes clear. What once felt scattered begins to organize, and what once felt like searching becomes direction. So the practitioner who understands the goal does not move endlessly between systems. They choose, they commit, and through that commitment, the path reveals its depth. And so, this is where I'm at with my path. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Next, I'm probably going to be doing a video on spiritual experiences, what they mean, what they don't mean, and how they affect the spiritual path. So, all right, thank you guys so much for sticking around this long. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.